Welcome to the fourth episode of the AI Healthcare Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Reid, and today we are joined with my friend, Rafael Rosengarten, who's the CEO of Genialis and is the co-founder, board director, and executive committee member of the Alliance for Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare. Thank you for your time, Rafael. I really appreciate it.
Dylan, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Now, what motivated you to get into the AI healthcare field, specifically the drug discovery process?
Yeah, that story is actually, part and parcel with how I ended up getting involved with Genialis in the first place. I was a biomedical researcher at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. This would have been around 2011, 2012. And the fellowship that was paying for my postdoctoral work was from the National Institutes of Health, National Library of Medicine. And the fellowship had a mandate or a requirement that I had to do multidisciplinary work. I had to have two advisors, one in the biological domain and one in the computational domain. And I had to do coursework at one of the member institutions in something that I didn't know yet. So I started sitting in on or auditing classes on Python programming, on statistical machine learning. I was a pure wet lab scientist, so these things were way out of my comfort zone, but fascinating to me. At the same time, I began collaborating with a research group from Slovenia, from the University of Ljubljana, who happened to have an affiliation with our lab group at Baylor. And these guys just blew my mind. The work we were doing with the Slovenians in terms of building analytic software, in developing new kinds of machine learning to analyze biological data, it changed the way I thought about doing science. I mean, I was an early user and completely drank the Kool-Aid. So I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to figure out a way to take these emerging technologies and apply them to the biology that I was already pretty comfortable with to make an impact in some way or another.
Awesome. And you have a very unique background. I've never seen someone that has kind of the science and also kind of the business acumen that you have. And kind of with those two backgrounds, what is one area that you see the most opportunity in creating AI models or large language models in the healthcare industry, and how can those help improve the drug discovery process?
That's very kind of you to say. The business acumen is I would question your observation there, but we try, and we're constantly learning. I think one of the unsolved pieces of the emergence of AI in the life science and healthcare sectors in general is what the business models are going to look like, right? So, we kind of know how to buy and sell software, and there are pretty well established economics for drugs, right? For diagnostics kits, for things like this. But what is the value of an AI model, right? Once that model is trained and it can be deployed maybe as software as a medical device, or it can be used to discover new molecules. Can we think of those pieces, those units of computational tooling as assets themselves? I don't know the answer to that question, but it's certainly part of the way we think about things at Genialis, and I know a lot of other companies are too. So I think one of the big opportunities that AI presents in healthcare isn't just to improve patient outcomes, which of course is what we're all focused on, but it's to rethink the way we do sort of the business of healthcare. The more we can think about linking the improvements that AI allows in healthcare to savings, to improving the way we do kind of the economics of healthcare, I think will also have massive impacts on people's lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's you brought up an interesting point. Based on kind of my limited experience, it seems like pharma has been very, very slow to adopt to using AI in the drug discovery process.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to gauge the speed of adoption compared to something else, right? To another kind of technology. But at the end of the day, big pharma are big by definition. And so they're going to move at sort of the pace they make decisions. And it's, of course, a very high risk business, right? So once your investments are already kind of put out, once your chips are on the table, you're going to see those investments through. And so it can be hard for them to shift gears and make decisions quickly. And of course, you'll have examples like Novartis, which spun up a huge AI initiative. I don't know if it was fast or slow to adopt, but most observers feel like they got out over their skis. They were almost doing AI for the sake of doing AI without having the problems to solve first. Mm-hmm. And I think that may actually be why the industry at large is taking its time to adopt these technologies, because AI is a toolkit, it's a toolbox. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't make sense to just start swinging hammers everywhere. You need to actually know what the nails are. You need to have your problems defined. And for, put these pieces together for a business sector that's, very high, capital intensive, high risk, high failure, adopting a whole bunch of tools without having proved use cases can be daunting or foolish. And then, of course, there's the biotech sector, which you'd expect to move more quickly than big pharma, just because they're essentially startups in the same space. And I felt that they were. I felt like 2019, 2020, first half of 2021, we saw a huge appetite among biotechs to adopt new technologies and to try stuff that would speed things up, help them hit their clinical goals faster. But of course, those companies became sort of the victims of the macroeconomic shift. And so, they're not going to be stable change agents the way that, strong cash position big pharma might be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and it's kind of what you were saying just bled into my next question perfectly. So from the website, you discuss two company technologies, one being Responder ID and the other one being Genialis expressions. What makes them revolutionary in the precision medicine field overall?
Sure. First, let me define what they are. So Responder ID is our kind of marquee, we'll call it a product. It's a framework. So it's a machine learning enabled framework for discovering biomarkers. And it's through Responder ID that we bundle our proprietary technologies with our proprietary data resources. It's where we pull in partner data resources as necessary and use all of that through the lens of what we call our people first approach. So a really human-centric approach to modeling disease biology. Expressions was our first product, our first commercial product, and we still have loads of customers and users who use Expressions as a standalone software for managing, analyzing, annotating their next-gen sequencing data. As the name implies, Expressions was built primarily to handle gene expression data, so RNA sequencing, but it's actually quite good at anything that comes off an Illumina machine. So any molecule, DNA, RNA, whether you're doing genomic sequencing or epigenetic or transcriptomic, it's good for that. But we use Expressions as a foundation for Responder ID, right? So we use Expressions in-house to manage all of our data, to create what we call a data flywheel. So all of the data are transformed into an interoperable state. They're annotated with metadata, so we understand the clinical provenance, the patient history, or in the case of it's preclinical data, all of that information. What makes these transformative, I think, is again how the technologies enable our particular philosophy to be brought to bear. So again, the philosophy is that a biomarker should not just measure one thing. If you look at almost all the approved companion diagnostics, the FDA cleared devices, the way that people think about biomarkers is rooted very much in, what's the cheapest and fastest thing to measure? What's the easiest thing to get approved? Okay, that all makes sense. But if we're only measuring one molecule in, say, a cancer patient, how do you expect that one molecule to have anything to do with how your drug's going to perform? It's just not enough information. Biology is too complex. So our philosophy is to embrace that complexity, is to wrap our arms around the complexity and say, listen, this fundamental biology, what's going on in the disease is really important to understand. Let's use our proprietary technologies. Let's use amazing tools like machine learning that are really good at picking patterns out of data and reduce this complexity to some kind of clinical practice. And so that's what we do. We build these models that really understand the underlying disease biology and all of its complexity and deliver an output to drug developers, to clinicians, to patients that is an abstraction, that is a simplification that says, all right, your disease is of type A, therefore you should get drug Z. Your disease is of type B, therefore you should get drug X. It allows us to understand the biology in a way where we can apply therapeutic, logic or therapeutic hypotheses. So I think it's a different approach. And again, what makes the technology special is these technologies were built to allow us to do this kind of biology first, people first biomarker development, which is pretty different from the old way of doing things.
Now, from what I've read and kind of what I've experienced, it seems like one of the big groups that, is not, I don't want to say that they're not embraceful of it, but it's the physicians themselves. So the physicians tend to be older. Medical education doesn't or hasn't for a long time embraced kind of AI in healthcare. Kind of what feedback have you gotten from physicians?
It's a great question. So We don't sell directly to practicing physicians, but we do interact with them a lot, especially in their roles as chief medical officers, as their role as consultants and advisors to diagnostics companies. I think you're right. I think that physicians, first of all, they want to go by the book. They want to go by the guidelines, right? So until a tool or a diagnostic or a drug has made it in, for example, to the national cancer care guidelines, most physicians aren't going to pay attention to it because it's just not the standard of practice. Physicians are also trained to follow their intuition, right? Mm-hmm. And so there may be some reluctance to listen to a machine or print out on a sheet of paper tell them what they couldn't figure out from their gut. But at the end of the day, everyone I've met in this business, from physician to drug developer, is in it for good reason, right? Everyone's in it because they want to help patients. And so my sense is that as AI-derived drugs and AI-invented drugs and AI-derived biomarkers start to have more actual clinical proof, the adoption will come. Mm-hmm. There's kind of an important truism, though, that like people don't buy technology; they buy solutions, right? So even if you're going to, say, a pharma partner and saying, "Hey, we've got this amazing AI. Do you want to buy it?" They're not going to buy something just because it's based on AI. In fact, they might not at all because that might make it more expensive or harder to understand. They want to buy something that solves their problem better, right? And so that's the burden for companies like ours. We have to show that what we're doing actually solves the problem better. And I think so far the evidence is overwhelmingly on our side. But it's a pretty big mountain of evidence that we have to compile, and so that's the work to be done.
Now, is from like the physician standpoint, do you notice it being more of a generational thing where younger physicians are like, "This is awesome," older physicians are like, "Nah, not so much, not for me"?
Purely anecdotally, and again, not speaking so much from clinical practice, but just professional curiosity. My peers, my friends who are physicians, are genuinely and generally super curious about this kind of AI stuff, right? Like they read about it, they study, they may even do continuing medical education on it. They're really interested generally in technology transforming healthcare. Anecdotally speaking, half a generation older and up. So I'm thinking now like, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law who are, 15 years older than me, for example. They're so frustrated by even like the transition into electronic medical records that it doesn't make the practice worthwhile. So, the adoption of new technology may not be rolled out smoothly enough at the practicing level that it's worth their time. And I think that's really part of the key here is if you're thinking about deploying a new technology, whether it's AI or something else, in a clinical setting, you have to do it in a way that does not disrupt the patient clinician relationship, that does not disrupt the workflow. It can be present there, but it has to make it smoother. It has to make it better, right? So that's also part of our hope. Clinicians are now in cancer space are used to sending off for a test of some kind. Mm-hmm. So can we make it so that our test just sits quietly on the back end, right? And they get a report that's the same report they would have gotten otherwise, but now it's just a lot smarter. I think we can. I think that's kind of the goal, right?
Mm-hmm. And with the technologies such as Responder ID and Genialis expressions, where do you, as Rafael Rosengarten, where do you see them in the near future making an impact on the AI healthcare industry, either from a scientific perspective, policy perspective, or even a business perspective?
Yeah, let's take each of those in turn, right? So one of the things that I think is cool about what we're doing, Responder ID is a number of things. It's a collection of proprietary technologies, trained algorithms, and data assets, right? And so we've got a growing library or suite of these trained algorithms that are validated retrospectively on patient data and then prospectively through clinical trials. And each of these algorithms tackles a fundamental aspect of cancer biology or a part of cancer biology, like the tumor microenvironment. So any drug targeting the tumor microenvironment can be analyzed by Responder ID for likely patient efficacy. We are working on a biomarker for the new class of KRAS therapeutics, right? So that's going to be, I think, a really big deal. These algorithms build up into something much bigger than the sum of their parts. We're covering all the hallmarks of cancer in a way that we can mix and match signatures and algorithms to essentially have a comprehensive cancer test, right? Mm-hmm. So from a technological standpoint and a patient reach standpoint, I think that's going to be huge. In a regulatory sense, most of my work in the regulatory framework is with the Alliance for AI in Healthcare, where I try to contribute where I can to the regulatory working groups, thought leadership and guidance to the FDA and to Congress and so forth. But what Genialis is doing that's interesting to me from a regulatory standpoint is we're merging two technologies, namely RNA sequencing and machine learning, which have not become mainstream in a regulated environment. So if you look again at approved companion diagnostics, to my knowledge, there are no RNA sequencing-based CDX. And if there are, they would be just to detect a gene fusion, but not to look at a complex signature. You merge that with machine learning, which is also pretty new, and you've got something that's very much at the regulatory bleeding edge, right? So I feel like we're pushing the envelope there. And we've been successful at working with the FDA to help get one of the tests we built accepted as an investigational device for an upcoming pivotal clinical trial. I consider that a really big win. But generally speaking, the FDA has been wonderful to work with through the Alliance and through Genialis in terms of their curiosity, their desire to be forward-looking and adopt new technologies. But the FDA is appropriately cautious about this sort of stuff. It should be, right? And it'll be interesting to see if broader regulatory and policy makers, who are trying to regulate, say, general AI, things like ChatGPT, if they start restricting healthcare AI, I think we're in trouble. I think they need to leave that to the FDA because I think the FDA is equipped to do that themselves. And then you asked about business. Like I said, I think the business of AI has not been figured out yet entirely, right? And so we're really interested in building these trained models and combining these trained models in ways that they can be considered assets, right? In the same way that you might consider a drug an asset or a diagnostic device an asset, a mature machine learning model, right? One that can be built into software as a medical device, one that can run a diagnostic device, one that can run a drug discovery program. These things, I think, can be viewed as assets unto themselves. And so, there have to be business models around that either haven't been explored or haven't been fully proved out yet. But, we'll see where the industry lands on that.
And what would be one particular policy area that you've seen either kind of specifically in drug discovery or even in precision medicine in AI and healthcare that Congress needs to understand, like they haven't wrapped their head around it?
I think when you talk about Congress, there's a lot they haven't wrapped their head around yet, right? So one of the main distinctions that I hope we make are AI-enabled devices that are really fit for purpose, right? So things that are meticulously trained on data that allow them to make predictions or recommendations or take action for a very particular medical or healthcare need, right? So those, again, I think fall nicely in the FDA's mandate versus something like you can imagine a consumer-facing web app where you can type in your symptoms and it's going to do a more thorough job than Google of telling you what you might be sick with, right? Which is a very general, not fit for purpose, broadly positioned AI. So I think one of the first things Congress needs to do, Congress and other policymakers and regulators, is understand the difference in application space for AI and recognize that the different types of applications may warrant different levels of scrutiny, different approaches to regulation, et cetera.
Yeah, because one of the things I've learned is that you can create a framework, which 9 times out of 10 the framework isn't even used, or the other method is creating a task force, but what the task force ends up becoming is 10 people in the room all having their own idea. So it's how do you it's a tricky situation.
Yeah, and it's I rarely say we should give Congress the benefit of the doubt, but Congress people are representatives of the people, and so there should be no expectation that they're experts in everything nor anything for that matter, but yet they're tasked with coming up with laws. My hope is that they have a very light touch when it comes to healthcare, at least in so much as we're talking about specific applications. Again, if you're putting out a public consumer-facing app, a ChatGPT-like product, then in my opinion, you're probably right there in Congress's wheelhouse for them to say something about it, right? Because it's going to affect the general public and so forth. If you're building something that's very specific for a healthcare domain, we've already got highly trained folks who understand that stuff, who I think are equipped to make the rules.
Yeah. And and it's fairly interesting kind of with what I've read kind of in the healthcare space is that we're kind of stuck in this time frame between 1965 when the Johnson administration passed Medicare and Medicaid, and then what you were earlier saying about EHRs. So around the 90s, I think it was 96 when the Clinton administration passed HIPAA, and we're kind of still in that bind of trying to figure out kind of where do we go from here?
Yeah, well, and of course HIPAA is badly outdated and needs updating, right? So it's passed in the 90s. The idea that you could have all your health information in a single app on your smartphone was not even a twinkle in someone's eye at that point. Maybe Steve Jobs had some sense of it, but no one else did, right? So those kinds of privacy and portability rules need to be updated, undoubtedly. I can tell you from personal experience, just from building a family where we had children born in 2 different hospitals in 2 different states, that just like getting mom's medical records from one to the next was really, really hard. Right, and that's frustrating and stupid, frankly. So yeah, we need smarter, more modern legislation around that sort of stuff. The other piece that we haven't talked about is reimbursement, and that's just a morass. It's a really, really kind of murky and hard to understand space for most people in the world, or at least most people in our country who have to think about it. And this is one area where those of us who are really excited about precision medicine, the idea that you can match patients to therapeutic interventions in a very precise way that is going to lead to better outcomes, we would like to see, we expect to see one day a top-down pressure saying, we're not going to reimburse a drug unless you can show that drug's likely to work, right? And for a lot of drugs we can. And so should we be giving checkpoint inhibitors to everybody in an indication when we know that 35% are going to respond and the other 65% are not? We can do better than that, right? We can find those 35% ahead of time.
Now, would you say part of kind of what makes our healthcare environment in the United States unique, though, is that we don't have a homogenous population like other countries do, and that we're so much bigger than other countries as well, that it's kind of really, it can be challenging to pinpoint specific public health needs and initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly, the United States is a tough country to govern in all ways for that and other reasons, right? It's physically large. It is, ethnically, racially, geographically, religiously diverse, right? It's very pluralistic. It has a huge wealth gap, right? So there's a huge disparity in sort of the haves and have-nots, which makes it hard to build one size fits all solutions. And frankly, federalism is complicated, right? The fact that you can have states that have rules that are different from one state to the next and different from the federal rules, and then even local government rules, all of that is hugely complex for any level of governance. Applying that then to kind of healthcare and the way that we deliver healthcare, the way we reimburse healthcare, it becomes absolutely maddening. I don't know if this is still true, but I presume it is. There's an anecdote that the single best marker for cancer outcomes, the thing that will tell you more precisely than anything else how likely someone is to survive cancer, is their socioeconomic status and the quality of their health insurance.
Yeah.
But I think that's sort of the point, right? Like, there are really, really tough structural challenges to getting healthcare right in this country.
No, there's just so much opportunity too as well, which is why I'm also passionate about AI and healthcare too as well.
Yeah, there are a lot of things to fix, but that means there are a lot of ways we can make it better.
No, definitely agree. And where can people find more about you, Rafael, about Genialis, or about you personally?
Yeah, so obviously our website, www.genialis.com, is a good place. We are pretty active on LinkedIn in terms of sharing company news. So you can find the company there. You can find me there as well when I've got things to say. The Alliance for AI and Healthcare is theaaih.org. That's not a bad spot. And thank you for having me on your podcast. We should flip the mic around. I also host a podcast called Talking Precision Medicine, And folks can find that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever they get their podcasts. So if you haven't already, subscribe to this one and then navigate over to Talking Precision Medicine and click subscribe.
Yeah. Thank you again, Rafael. Really appreciate it. And also, don't forget to check out my newsletter on the AI Healthcare Report on LinkedIn. This is Dylan Reid signing off.
Dylan, thanks a ton.
Thank you.